Hello, my name is Nick Merker. I'm a partner at Ice Miller and chair of our firm's data security and privacy practice. And this is a reoccurring Twitch series named Privacy Chat, where I'll be giving you updates on different things going on related to things with the COVID-19, like folks working from home or increase opportunities for ransomware or privacy compliance changes, things like that. This will be maybe a 10 to 20 minute video. These will also be uploaded on YouTube. You can find me on any of the channels on the right here on Twitch, Instagram, YouTube, Twitter, or Facebook as N Merker. And with that, let's kind of just get going on what I wanted to talk through today. I wanted to talk through today about how the workforce has changed dramatically in the span of just 1 week. Where, if you go back just 2 weeks ago, people were in the office, people were communicating, people were having phone calls, people were seeing each other at the water cooler, at the coffee shop, at the coffee areas, wherever at the company. You had a personal element to everything that the company did. That is no longer the case. And so, because of that, people are having to rely on email in ways that they haven't really done before. I mean, companies have been using email forever. I'm not saying that that's a new thing. But when folks no longer can walk down the cubicle line or walk down the hall or just see somebody, they email them. And we're probably seeing a balloon of our mailboxes as folks who are now working from home try to find ways to stay just as productive and to keep your business processes running in the way that the company needs them to run when they're not in the office to get them done. And this creates some possible areas of risk. I'm not going to talk about anything new in the next 10 minutes. I'm just going to talk about how there is increased opportunity for attackers to exploit vulnerabilities associated with common electronic communication platforms when there's no human element, and email in particular. Let's go through one example. This is a real example from a real client situation that I had. You can see the email example here is from 2016. This is the first time that we saw this was in 2016, but we're getting close to tax time, and especially in this time with the new stimulus where there's potential unemployment claims, there's folks that may be asking for tax information. I mean, we're coming up on April 15th, although that has been pushed back. A lot of people are going to file by April 15th. And this type of request from an attacker is common. Good morning. Hope you had a good weekend. You have PDF copies of the employees' W-2s. Could you email them to me for a quick review? This email looks outrageous. Sent from my iPhone. If you're someone in HR and you receive this email, you probably would not respond to it, right? Well, you might be wrong. I've had many clients fall prey to this exact attack. An attacker is trying to get the W-2s to engage in tax fraud, to get first in line at the IRS with a fraudulent tax filing so they get actual money out of the IRS. This has been happening for multiple years. This is just an example, though, of business email compromise. The kind of traditional business email compromise isn't really to get information out of the company. It's more to get money out of the company. And this is how they might do it. This is from the FBI's website, or the Internet Complaint Center's website, talking about business email compromise in particular. And this is what they say attackers do. The first thing, they engage in business email compromise to get money from the company, to get the money to wire the attacker money instead of wiring their vendors or their suppliers or people that they're supposed to wire the money to. And they do it in this way. They identify you. They identify someone at the company who's going to have access to money, whether it's an accounts payable person, a CFO, really anyone that has access to money. That's who they're focused on. And then they start grooming. They look for information about the person, like on Facebook, on LinkedIn, on Twitter. Maybe they just look in other people's mailboxes. Many times hackers have compromised other mailboxes in the environment such that they are in my email and they're reading my emails to someone in accounts payable to figure out how the business operates, and then they want to get in the middle of that. Let me give you a real example with a real client. We had a situation where a client's just a random employee who was a manager, I believe, their business email was compromised, or the attacker was inside that person's mailbox. The attacker learned that the way this company processed invoices was as follows. The invoice comes into someone's mailbox, then it gets routed to accounts payable, then accounts payable routes it to the CFO. The CFO, if the CFO approves it, he will print out the invoice. He will sign hand wet signature on the invoice, the physical printout, and he will write the billing code that is associated with that invoice. and then he will email the invoice, the signed, then he'll scan it again and email the signed and account code invoice to someone in accounts payable to actually pay. And when that CFO's invoice hits your mailbox in accounts payable, you just pay it without question because that is his approval for you to move forward. Well, the attacker figured this out by compromising in a manager, someone not even related to accounts payable, not the CFO, but the attacker was in some manager on a product line's email and just saw this traffic because it turns out managers are sometimes copied on this process. So the attacker figured out how this worked, and the attacker just cut right to the end. The attacker created I think it was a Yahoo or a Hotmail account with a fake domain associated with the company. So instead of, let's say the company is nickmerker.com, instead of registering or using nickmerker.com, because the attacker doesn't really have access to that for the CFO's mailbox, which is the one he's about to spoof, the attacker registered nickmerker1.com. And then the attacker sent an email to someone in accounts payable from the nickmerker1.com domain saying, hey, I'm the CFO. Here's an invoice that's approved. Here's my signature. Here's a payable code. Now, the attacker had all of that information because the attacker compromised the manager's mailbox. The attacker was able to find an actual signed invoice from the CFO that was legitimate, and the attacker stole that wet signature, stole a valid payable code, and then just generated a fake invoice from a fake email address and sent it to someone in accounts payable, and they paid off this money. The attacker was able to do this multiple times, and it only came to light that the company found out about this because they said, hey, we're paying some vendor that we don't have a W-9 for. Do you know who this vendor is? And they started looking it up, and that vendor was just someone that did not exist. It was the attacker. So that's what the attacker does. They groom you. They start sending you emails. Then they exchange information. Like I said, they send you the invoice with the signature on it, and then you send the money off. It is critically important to catch this as quick as possible because the attackers know this. They want to get the money in the bank account as quickly as they can and get it out as quickly as they can before you have an opportunity to catch it. I'll talk about that in a minute. This is not new. Like I said, this is a PSA from the FBI in 2017, one from 2018, saying, hey, this is a big deal. This is a lot of money on the line. And in these examples, the FBI is saying, this is the one from 2018. They said in 2018, since they started taking measurements of this, they were into billions of dollars. I think it was $12.3 billion was the last number that they gave out, or maybe it was 25 billion, but it's a lot of money. And importantly, it's only money that is notified to IC3. It's only money that someone reports is missing to the FBI. In some situations, I've had clients with this where they don't want to engage law enforcement for one reason or another, and they just don't. So this is not even a full number, but is in the billions and billions of dollars. So the FBI, the reason why you want to catch this quickly is the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, the Secret Service, they all have access to this financial fraud kill chain. The financial fraud kill chain is where the FBI or someone can get in the middle of a fraudulent wire transfer, and if it's caught within time, within 72 hours, they say here as their example, they have a 75% recovery rate. So in losses of 257 million that were reported to them in time, they were able to get back 192 million of it. This is not a lot of money when you're talking about billions lost because most of the time we don't catch this in time. But if you do catch it in time, you can go to a contact and you can say, hey, I need you to execute the kill chain and get my money back. And if it's in time, they usually can. Now, the reason I want to mention this is most companies do not have a direct bead into the FBI or the Department of Homeland Security or the Secret Service such that they can execute this kill chain. If you do what's actually shown in this picture, which is from an IC3 kind of report on the fund transfer fraud, you're not going to get it in 72 hours because they don't have, although they have pictured, they really don't have an analyst sitting there waiting for you to submit a claim so they can execute the kill chain. No, you need to go from victim to FBI field office. And the way you usually do that if you don't have the connection yourself is through a lawyer. Your attorneys should have connections to these folks that can get this done as quickly as possible. If you don't have and you don't catch this in 72 hours, what happens is you go through a whole process in order to get the money frozen at the receiving bank end, and you'll at the end of the day get no money. It'll all be gone. The attackers know that this kill chain exists, and so they want to get the money out as quickly as possible because once the assets are frozen at the receiving bank, the attacker can't get it anymore. So they want to get the money out before you even know it's gone. So again, it's critically important to have in your incident response plan or in kind of your accounts payable process when you think fraud is identified, that you immediately contact someone with one of these contacts in order to get this kill chain executed to try to get your money back. And if you do so in time, the FBI boasts a 75% recovery rate. I also want to note that a lot of your business processes are changing regarding your help desk. So think about what you would do a month ago if someone needed a password reset. What they would do is they'd be sitting in their office and they might pick up their company phone and call your help desk. And the help desk can probably trust or feel like they can trust the person on the other end because it's coming from a company number. Or maybe you would just walk down to the help desk and you would face to face interact with someone and say, "Hey, I forgot my password. Can you help me reset it?" Um, you can't do that anymore. The way you have to reset a password now is take an employee phone call from their personal phone or an employee email from a personal email account. And this is ripe for attackers to get in the middle of. In the past 3 years, I've worked many breaches associated with faulty password reset processes, where an attacker calls a help desk remotely. The attacker says, "Hey, I'm Nick Merker, but actually an attacker, and I need to reset my password." And the help desk on the other end, wanting to be helpful because that's their job, they walk that person through the attacker how to reset the password, and they give the attacker essentially access to company resources. And the vulnerability here is that your help desk probably was not thinking about an attacker spoofing Nick Merker when calling in. They were thinking about just wanting to make sure that they could get people's password reset. So you use verification questions that might not be all that good. You might use their employee ID number, you might use their telephone number, you might use the name of their manager. I had one client use. And so these verification questions that get asked just may have vulnerabilities. They may be able to get to be guessed by an attacker. So think about this process and how it's changed, and maybe think about new verification questions. One thing I mentioned to a client: instead of, if you get an incoming request for someone to reset their password, don't do it. Instead, say, "Hey, I know your cell phone number. I am going to call you right back and we will walk through the password reset process there." If you have everyone's cell phone number, and I bet you do in your payroll system, you could call them back and you could reset their password in most situations. I had another client, they were a commission based company, and they use the amount of someone's last commission check as their password reset verification question. That's a great question to me. Your people that work on commission, they're going to know how much they got paid, or at least the ballpark of it, and that's a pretty good verification question. You want to avoid questions an attacker may be able to get, like the name of your manager. So think about it this way: if I'm an attacker and I'm in that manager's email account that I was talking about earlier in the privacy chat, and I learn about another employee, I will be able to get information about that person. So it's also not only a verification question that an attacker may not be able to find publicly, but also other people in the company shouldn't know the answer to the question as well. You want something that's going to be isolated to that employee, which is why I really think the call back on a known good number is probably the best. Another thing you can do is you can use self-help. If you're an Office 365 customer, this is the tinyurl.com/QTUC2M5 there. That link will take you to a video from Microsoft explaining how employees can reset their own passwords, and they have a self-help system. So if you're an Office 365 customer, you can engage in self-help, which is removes this whole help desk fraud directly. It creates its own problems, I'm sure, as you can guess, but it's just another thing to think about. I also want to mention how we are moving to new communication platforms. Before I get into, I think the human element in this time is more important than anything else that we are working on in terms of securing our business processes. Because once the human element is removed, it is much easier for an attacker to come in and exploit that lack of a human element, where it's much easier for an attacker to fake like they're you over email than it is to fake like they're you over the phone. Or if you have a really good repertoire with someone, let's take an example. If one of my very good friends at the office sent me an email and said, "Hey Nick, I need you to wire off $50,000 to this address," and I talk to that person every day at the coffee area at the company, or I talk to them on the phone frequently, I'm probably going to pick up the phone and go, "Hey, you've never asked me to do this before. What the heck is going on?" If you take that human element away and you don't have those types of interactions anymore, an attacker is going to be more successful in these types of attacks. And so this is an example from my company, and this is before the Zoom kind of lost favor, and people are now moving to other solutions. But we just had a happy hour on Zoom. It was a video happy hour where everyone had a beer or a glass of wine. We played Jackbox trivia, and we just had a really fun time. All just interacting in a way that we couldn't since we're not at the office anymore. This was a way for us to get as close as we could to that human element. I think this is absolutely critical from a security perspective, and not only the just employee productivity and employee happiness perspective, but from a security perspective, I think this is critical. Your employees need to keep talking to each other. And you don't have to set up a meeting like I have here. I would get video, get something real time collaboration, get out of email if you can. You can use Jabber, you can use WebEx, you can use FaceTime, you can use Microsoft Teams. You could just send a text message. And then I'm not saying conduct company business over text message if that's against your policy, but you can send text messages to communicate on a personal level between each other. Keep that personal collaboration intact because it is your best line of defense in stopping these business email compromise or these business process compromises that attackers are going to try to get into in the midst of the current situation. The last thing I want to mention, the last couple things, one is that compliance obligations are rapidly changing in this area. This is from the OCR. They said, hey, usually you should have a business associate agreement if you are using FaceTime with Apple, and Apple's not going to sign that, so no one uses FaceTime for engaging in healthcare. But they said, because of the situation, we're going to temporarily note temporarily stop enforcement for non-compliance where people are using FaceTime, Messenger, Hangouts, or Skype, or other common communication platforms. I just want to note temporarily because my fear with this shift, and this is a great shift from Severino, the OCR director. This is hugely necessary for the healthcare system to continue to function while people are staying at home. I applaud OCR for this. This is great. But my concern is that some healthcare providers are going to get complacent, and this is going to become the new normal. And when this is no longer necessary, and OCR pulls this enforcement discretion away, and doctors continue to rely on these systems, OCR is going to be able to come back and find non-compliance. So I want to applaud OCR. They did a great job to show that the compliance hurdles are being removed for you to make it easier for you to get your business done, but do not get complacent. And if you're going to use these tools, educate your employees on how to use them in a proper way. And a great example at the bottom of this notice, they say, hey, don't use Facebook Live, Twitch, TikTok, or publicly available video conferencing solutions because they're publicly available. The whole point is to have a one-to-one conversation if you're going to talk to a patient. So I just think it's great that the lines are being shifted, but make sure you're still doing it in a compliant way. And as a final note, this is a great time to review your insurance coverage. Your cyber risk insurance coverage was purchased by your team to address and transfer certain risks. Well, your risk profile in 1 week has completely changed. It is time to reassess your cyber risk insurance policy, reassess your insurance generally, maybe, to make sure you have coverage for the things that you need. Do you have coverage in a situation where an employee's personal computer is compromised, an attacker gets in and executes a fund transfer? Or your employee's personal computer is compromised and data has now left the door for the company? Those are new questions for a lot of companies that you should answer, you should assess, and make sure you're transferring risk appropriately to your insurance carrier based on your risk profile. Make sure you're buying insurance that's tied to your risk profile is the most important thing here. And that isn't just true for the situation right now, that should always be true, but now that your risk profile is completely shifted with all your employees at home, think about this. This is something that can be addressed now. Your insurance brokers are available to have very minor endorsements in certain situations to plug gaps if they're identified before breach. If you identify a coverage gap after breach, well, you're probably not going to get coverage. So think about this stuff now. And with that, thank you. This is Nick Merker again. I'm the chair of Ice Miller's Data Security and Privacy Practice, and this is Privacy Chat. I'm Nick at icemiller.com or at nmerker at any of the platforms on the right: Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, or Twitch. Thank you so much for listening today.